We all about justice. We all about freedom. We all about justice. To win we gotta beat them. Hey, hey, Amir, justice Amir. It's study hour with the street Sufi, about a higher power, no spooky. Higher muscle, no pseudo goofies. Come measure what kippa or goofy. It's study hour with the street Sufi, about a higher power, no spooky. Higher muscle, no pseudo goofies. Come measure what kippa or goofy. It's that top-notch scholarly, making model, no apology. From the dealer, smelling like a new V. Good money, no fee, like freestyle. See studies, no X-Files. Beware of the reptiles. Promised land, we the exiles. What we overdo, but let the work pile. Through the trials and tribulations since a wild child. Chicago to NY, frequency, paperwork, party with they auto summon S&Ps. Hebrew, Egyptian or more. We more like at our core. All humanities, one families, we related. By a higher force, from one we all created. It's study hour with the street Sufi, about a higher power, no spooky. Higher muscle, no pseudo goofies. Come measure what kippa or goofy. It's study hour with the street Sufi, about a higher power, no spooky. Higher muscle, no pseudo goofies. Come measure what kippa or goofy.
Peace and love, man. You know, it's been a while. You know, we're going to go ahead and get this in right quick breeze and talk about a little bit of stuff as far as the information that we've been going through off and on, and correcting a lot of errors in a community, you know, out there.
So is there anything, first off, that you want to correct or just a statement you want to make about maybe some of the past statements that you've made? You don't got to be too specific, but if you just want to make a...
Well, any form of racist models I don't promote, in the sense of white over black and black over white. I don't promote that. I just follow the data and present things in a scientific manner based off my understanding of what I know. Being an autodidact that I am, I like to really follow the data and with my scientific understanding of how science works and models, I like to give a proper explanation. But when it comes to any race bait thing, I'm not here to do that. So, you know, there has been things in the past that I have said that would have came off in line with pseudoism, because it's not overall, but slight, because of my own personal bias interpretation of things. But this ain't that. We're here to deliver truth. I'm here to deliver truth and get the information out there and give a proper full understanding of how things work and what's going on and who was who. That's it.
Are we more alike? DNA says we're 99.9%.
Yeah, Homo sapiens are 99.9% the same. We're not a separate species. I mean, you know, the 0.1% is, you know, 5 million base pair chemicals in variation, which allows us to have different traits like skin color and different things. But ultimately, no, we function the same as Homo sapien. We go through the same things. When disease and certain things attack us, our bodies go through the same similar situations. The way a diseased Homo sapien should function. When our energy levels is up, naturally we function the same way. Blood pressure levels function the same way. If you when a doctor's able to determine good health, they look at your organs, they see how it's functioning. If it's functioning the way a Homo sapien is supposed to function, it's that, you know. So overall, they're able to measure that based off what the human being is supposed to do and what he shouldn't do. So at that point, it proves that there is no color lines in the field of science in that sense. Yes, differences exist based off small traits, based off the environments that we, you know, developed in certain regions for thousands of years. But overall, the functioning of the species, we haven't been separated from one another long enough to be a subspecies from one another, and we haven't been separate long enough to even be a different species, not even just at a sub level, because sub means below or under. So we are 100% the same species. I'm not 100%, but 99.9%, you know, ultimately the same. biologically 100 because we are a functioning Homo sapien sapien. And even with some of us that receive 2-3% Neanderthal segment, Neanderthals was 99.6% similar to us. But the reason why we see differences is because of developmental regulatory genes, which allows us to have difference. So they are in another species line, separate difference.
So if you had a message for the brother Dan Colloway, if you could give him a message for Dan Colloway and the people, the Abos.
Well, I think that's dangerous in the pseudo. He denies African slavery. He make us. I don't fuck with a lot of Abos because anytime you deny your African heritage and your African ancestors, you're trying to uphold some other shit. Nigga, you got a mental problem. So I think he's full of shit. I think he's dangerous. He's just as dangerous as Tariq Nasheed and other pseudos in the community. They all full of shit. Regardless of some African Americans having Q and mtDNA A and B, you know, that's a fact. But a lot of people that got that, they're not denying their African ancestry, right? They're not going to deny that shit. You know, some people don't care about that. But these niggas, they assume because, you know, people were dark or Native Americans were darkly pigmented, and, you know, because many of them were, right? They assume that represents, that's why we look the way we look, because we're the original intent, and then we become culture vultures like the Anglos, right? That's the problem. We become culture vultures like the people that colonized people. It took people identity. We don't have to do that shit as black people. We don't have to be insecure about anything. The Western Central African represents the most deep basal phase of Homo sapien history. So everything that drifts away, you don't have to claim shit. You just being who you are alone as a black sub-Saharan African is beautiful, right? Why do you have to be claimed or try to steal certain people, individual shit to make yourself feel like you're superior? That comes off very insecure. When you are a black person from the deeper portions of equatorial Africa, and you represent one of the base phases of human development within the species of Homo sapiens, why would you want to be anything else? I mean, when Homo sapiens first arose, they arose in equatorial zones of Africa. Then we have to look at the radiation level. Radiation is responsible for DNA damage. The more DNA damages, the more mutations you have. When you understand radiation, radiation causes pressure. Pressure causes damage. Damage is within itself is mutation. So you can see what happened to the species when we arose in equatorial zones of Africa, probably near central eastern zones of Africa, going southeast, but central in between. So this is why you find Oberman 1, Oberman 2. But even Jabella Hood that was found in Morocco, he wasn't from there because you had a lot of Africa as a species is the continent. It was the phase of how Homo sapiens developed. It wasn't a regional thing. It was more of a pan-African thing. We were going all over, so you had failed migration. So you find Jabella Hood in Morocco, but he wasn't from there. He died there. Ancestors settled there. You have earlier phases of this. You have Floresberg skull found in South Africa, and you find Y chromosome A00 in Cameroon. And there are other things that show that Homo sapiens developed in equatorial zones or sub-equatorial zones of the continent. So we understand the values of radiation. We understand the type of environment, lush land that they was living in, and all the different changes that they went through. So with that being said, when you look at Floresberg skull, Oma 1, Oma 2, Y chromosome A00, and all of the mitochondria all based within those equatorial southern zones of the continent, you can have a deep emphasis or understand why sub-Saharan Africa is the base source for what gave a rise to Homo sapiens, our species within itself. There's a lot of things that make way for it. And the only surviving lineage of Homo sapiens outside of Africa goes back to a small population that left out of Northeast Africa that diverged from ancestral East Africa, right? Follow the phylogenetic tree, you can see the pattern that's going on. People outside of Africa, they were in different climates. They had to survive. They had to make the best out of what they had. You had a lot of droughts, a lot of famines. They had to figure things out. With all the droughts and famine, they had to learn to preserve seeds and grain to save their food just in case. They had to fight larger animals, so they had to deal with technology in the form of weaponry and weaponizing their text in the sense of the technology that they used with iron in order to go against larger organisms or other forms of wildlife that they were going against. So they had to use their technology in the sense of weaponizing at a very earlier time period compared to the population group that was, you know, in lush Africa at a specific time. So there's a lot of reason why the brain has to function and figure out things more and start creating all these different things that we classify as complex, you know, in order for the organism Homo sapiens to survive outside of the continent. It's a very sharp reason why. And if you understand, you can see why they was able to deal with farming and building more, not living in huts, but more stone infrastructure and structures. You know, when the water come or a flood comes, it's knocking that shit means it's more sturdier. So there's a reason why they're here to figure out these things outside of the continent.
I'm going to play a clip for everybody from the recent Queen's Flip visit to the ISUPK, the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge.
Do you believe in science?
Yes. Yes.
So if you
depending on the act, like depending on what we talk about with science, I believe in science.
and say if you, and this is no, let me know if I'm crossing the line.
No, man, you ain't never crossing the
Say
line.
if you
Just
took
ask the
a
question.
test and you have white in your genes,
like a percentage. So
A
the
percentage
way
of white in your
ancestry
DNA.
would do, yeah. So
how would you respond? Now, would you look at?
I'll tell you how
okay.
I respond. So if you take the DNA for your ancestry, we would still go by what the paternal line say.
Paternal line.
Because when you get the same amount of chromosomes from your mother and father, so when they doing ancestry, even though it's not accurate, but let's say if you go by the ancestry, they're going to look at your mother's side and your father's side.
Were you able to view the whole thing? And if so, can you speak on some of the statements that Cesariak had made in that?
Well, Cesariak been saying for years that Black Americans are Israelites, and the male father line determines who we are, and a lot of stupid, crazy things. And that's not true. African Americans don't come from ancient Israelites. Ancient Israelites' presence in Africa was in certain regions, right? Like the Sahaja Jews that was in the early Sahara, that was mingling in North Africa. Even before you find the Sephardics in the different groups, or you had the Jews in Al-Fatane and certain portions of Upper Egypt. These people were Levantine people. And the closest people that can match with them as a proxy would be, Samaritans, Christian Lebanese, Christian Palestinians, Christian Jordanians, and different groups of people. This is what the Israelites were. People of color. They can be classified as brown, and we know that brown can range from light olive wheat, in the sense of close to white, but a yellowish under hue, to skin tone, or they can tan really good to this deeply pigmented brown, right? So overall, we classify that as the brown race, even though race doesn't exist, but the brown banner, right? So we part of that classification. We have some modern day Hispanics that can be just as light as a Italian or a Mediterranean, which they are highly genetically, right? And then they're classified in America as brown things. So if we've seen Yeshua or Daoud, peace be upon them, and they came to the West, and we can go back, bring them back in time, they'll be classified as brown people. In that sense of what we can already see as a modern proxy with Mediterranean people, or misquote a lot of the old things when things say dark or swarthy or I'm very black. They use that as a weapon to put themselves, to project themselves as that. And this is why America is so fucked up with our education system, because they created the model of black and white. If it's not white, it's black. So when people read this outdated information or certain things about Babylonian blackheads, Sumerian black, and different shit, we're trying to say that these people were black people, not understanding the nuances and the different things that comes with these population groups, right? So he's completely wrong. The Israelites were not black. The Hebrews were not black in no form or fashion, in the sense of black from West and Central Africa or any portion of what's described locally as sub-Saharan Africa below the Sahara or south of the Sahara.
And then they're going to say, based on that, you like 78% this, 22% that, XYZ like that. So if you have a percentage that might be European, but your paternal line is not European, you still would be what you would consider black. Okay. But let's say if you're because there's markers, so you have E markers, L markers, and I think the L marker, if I have it correct, is the European marker. The E marker is the what they would call African or black marker.
Okay.
So if your paternal side is still the black marker, even if you have a percentage of white in you, that wouldn't come from your father's side, that would come from your mother's side. So that would mean that somebody in my line might have slept with a white woman.
Okay.
As opposed to somebody in my line is a white man.
Do you believe that we came here, we all came here from Africa?
Oh, what you mean?
Like
planet Earth? Or like over here to the Americas?
To the Americas.
Yeah. We definitely came from the west coast of Africa.
Okay.
Sure.
And do you identify that? Because you just said you don't like Africans.
I don't.
So you don't. So you disregard that part of your...
No, I don't disregard that part, but there's a migration. So the children of Israel, when Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, we migrated into Africa.
He got it confused. And Y chromosome L is not European. But what he's trying to say is Y chromosome L is non-African. But it's not European. Remember, L is related to P. They both diverged from somewhere in the Middle East or the Near East. So he got it misunderstood. So Y chromosome L has nothing to do with Europe. So he's wrong on that. So he kind of like got the wrong data or he's misinformed on what he's saying. He's not a geneticist, so he don't study genetics. So it's hard for him to really understand proper data, you know, in real time, let alone, you know, Middle Eastern theological studies when it comes to understanding Middle Eastern customs and the theology of the monotheistic faith, the Near East, or Abrahamic faith. He barely understands that because he puts it in the text of recognizing it or trying to in a real rigid, I don't want to say Afrocentricity because they are deeply against Afrocentric because they don't like Africa, and that's misinformation as well, but they also try to blackenize it in some weird way, you know. So when you find mtDNA-L, and he got it confused with Y chromosome L, mtDNA-L is African. It's rooted in Africa. It starts in Africa. L0 is the mother of all Homo sapiens, right? And so L is African, so he got that wrong. But he got it confused with the Y chromosome L. The Y chromosome L is not, like I just stated, it's not European. So like I said, and what is European on the paternal side in black people or different groups of people, or the common markers, R1B, you might find like I, those are typical European markers, you know. So you can find that common. So, you know, around 30% of African American males have Y chromosome R. To a lesser extent, some of us have I. Some black Americans to a very small extent have G. You know, my best friend, who I call my brother, has G. I'm not going to say his name. So there are black Americans with G that they received from populations that crossed through Eastern Europe who gave it to people in Western Europe, which shows that people in Europe are not a monolith or homogenous genetically, because they've been going back and forth regardless of them even looking alike. Muhammad Ali has R, Nas has I, a few African Americans, Marcus Garvey has R, white man who has E, Hitler has E. It's not a color thing. For anyone to say that they hate Africans and it's coming from an African American, I think Cesariak is misinformed and it's coming from a very confused, detrimental, dark place, because African Americans are Africans. They descend from Western Central Africans. That's their primary ancestor. Matter of fact, it's that major component of their ancestors that gives them the label and the classification or define them as what's labeled as black in the social constructual society that we live in. Because African Americans primarily descend from Western Central Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa within itself is a banner for being black. Even though it means south of the Sahara or below the Sahara, we know the primary phenotype of population south of the Sahara are dark skinned. Just like with the people in Sudan, when the Arabs came in, they labeled them as Bilal el Sudan, and then you look up Bilal el Sudan or Western Sudan, that crosses from modern-day Sudan all the way through the Western Sahel, right? So black or West Africans, that's what African Americans are. That's their primary ancestor. The average African American is ranging from 80% to as little as 43%, because some African Americans are highly admixed. And you also have the African Americans who are direct, what they classify as biracial, who identify themselves as still black, even with being biracial. So even to a lesser extent, out of 48 to 43%. It depends on the individual. But the average standard of African American is 80%. So their primarily highest ancestors is from different regions of Western Central Africa. So African Americans are Africans. They descend from Africa. They're Africans of the diaspora. Like the other Africans of the Caribbean of the diaspora. You know what I'm saying? So that's what it is. So to hate Africans, to hate yourself. So he has real deep self-hate because he's confused with his belief of what the Israelites was. And the Israelites were not Africans. The Israelites was West Asians. Even though, you know, Egypt and Israel are side by side from each other. And Israel sits, the Gaza Strip kind of separates African-Syrian rift. They call it the kissing bridge, where it kind of bridges and meet with North Africa. But that's the beginning of West Asia. But Egypt is a transcontinental country. One portion of Egypt is connected to going into West Asia at like 5% of the country of Egypt, which is that Gaza Strip. And that Gaza Strip goes into the lead of the beginning phases of the Levant. But those are not black Africans. So for him to say that, it's coming from a very confused, dark place. You could be an Israelite and have a belief in Yahweh, right? Which is a powerful belief system, because Yahweh, you know, according to the narrative that's presented, the father of many, peace be upon him, brought to us, is the true and living God. There's nothing outside of that if you believe in a monotheistic faith. And I am in a monotheistic faith. So you can believe in the one supreme God of the universe and not be an Israelite. You could be a Nigerian, you could be a Ghanaian, you could be a French, a Britishman, Irish, whatever. Even an Arab. If you believe in the one God of Abraham, peace be upon him, you are a firm believer. It's not about race, you know, at all. It's not about race. And we shouldn't get caught up in that idolatry and start saying we hate certain individuals. Some of your most devout worshipers of God, whether it's through the form of Allah or whether they worship
Messiah, peace be upon them, is that you believe in the God, the true and living God. That's all that matters, not landmass. And that's a form of idolatry.
If we're trying to trace it to the land of Israel, where do African Americans fall, even compared to like Ashkenazi Jews?
African Americans wouldn't fall and play with it because African Americans' primary ancestors West and Central Africa. So they don't fall in line with any of the people of that region. Like I said, the closest people to the actual Israelites were the Samaritans, Lebanese Christians, Palestinian Christians, you know, and then within a Jewish branch, they maintain the faith, the Mizrahi Jews, the Jews, the Sahajas, who lingered in the Sahara in North Africa, the Sephardics, but the Sephardics picked up a lot of higher drifted Iberian Peninsula DNA and picked up some North African traces, but they have a thicker layer of Levantine than the average Ashkenazi. But the Ashkenazi is also a combination between Italian, Iberian-like signature, and also, you know, Levantine, and they picked up some Central Eastern European. They're a bit drifted away from the Sephardic. The Sephardic will be closer. But the Iranian Jews, the Mizrahi, those Jews are much more in line. But outside of them, you know, the number one population that's close to a proxy would be the Samaritans and the Christian Palestinian and Lebanese population and Jordan populations as Christian. Because of these people staying in the Middle East, and then they start breeding within their families consistently, within their direct lineage, and then pick up a lot of outside traces. A lot of later Arab addition or other deeper drifted Iberian Peninsula signature. Even though the people in Iberian Peninsula are close to Anatolian farmers, and the Anatolian farmers are some of the major sources of the Levantine regions at one point in time, which they're able to map out what's that and what's not, right? So you have to be very cautious when reading certain PCAs. So if we want to look at populations that stayed there without, you know, intermingling with other people or getting any late additions who were isolate, we have to look at more of the early Christian groups in those areas, or the Samaritan populations. But as far as African Americans, they fall. African Americans have more in common with Yoruba, Igbo, Mindi, and different groups of Sierra Leone and Ghana, and even some Bantu speakers in Cameroon. They have more genetic affinities. African Americans even have more genetic affinities with an Irish man or a British man than a person in the Middle East, because that represents 15 to 20% of their ancestry, right? So they have more in common with that white man from England or Ireland than they would with somebody from the Middle East. Because the British in the North are only 30% to 40% Anatolian old farmer at an earlier drifted time that mixed with Mesolithic European hunter-gatherers. And then they picked up a lot of step ancestry and created their own unique cluster. So African Americans have more in line with the British or the Irish or Northwestern European than they would with people in the Middle East recently.
When it comes to understanding generations, 8 generations, admixture occurs after generation. That's obvious. Nobody's 100% their direct great ancestor. Haplogroups are sex chromosomes or deep ancestral paternal and maternal lineage that goes unchanged, but they don't recombine. So with that being said, the maternal or paternal marker, there's your deep ancestral paternal and maternal lineage, even though subclades can erode much later. But overall, it doesn't change until a short amount of time, right? Autosomal DNA is what you accumulate within recent generations through time. So you can be paternally anybody, but autosomally you can be highly anybody. So, for example, look at Puerto Ricans or different people in Latin America. They can be autosomally Mediterranean highly at 60 to 7%, at 60 to 70% in some cases. But their Y chromosome could be Y chromosome common with Bantu people in Cameroon, or their Y chromosome could be common with people in the Middle East, or their Y chromosome could be, to a lesser extent, common with Native Americans, the indigenous people. But that doesn't denounce their ancestral skeleton grandfather who's buried in South America, who was a Taino or Arawak, right? Even though, you know, they have that, even if they don't even share a paternal mark, it's still in them autosomally because they have mothers. These mothers were Native American women who the conquistadors ran through at a specific time. So a lot of people will have Native American mitochondrial DNA, which is common in Hispanic population when it comes to their mitochondrial DNA. So those women that they descend from deep down in deep ancestral lineage maternally, they had fathers. So their fathers, great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfathers is buried underground in America. So just because you don't have your great-great-grandfather in your maternal, it doesn't mean that you're not related to it. We all related in some type of way. It's scuffles like that.
That does not take away from that person being your ancestor.
No.
Just because you have a different haplogroup, that person is still your ancestor. You just do not have a direct line unbroken through the male side, but through the female side, you still relate to that. And I would assume that's why probably Ashkenazis ended up changing their thing from the biblical text where it was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then somewhere I believe in the Common Era they changed it in the Talmudic times to the mother.
Correct. You know, they went through a bottleneck. You know, there's a lot of things that occurred after the temple collapse in Rome in 60 AD. So a lot of things occurred because the Jews at one point, they went into Rome as straight Libertine type people. They were closer to Samaritan types or Christian Lebanese or Christian Palestinians. I said close, not overall, because there's still some integration with all populations. That's just a standard model, right? But then they started to mix with the indigenous people of Europe and they start to become, in one phase, they go from highly Levantine-like to being very Sephardic-like because they was mixed with people in the Iberian Peninsula, right? And then in another later phase, when the temples collapse, they leave out of Rome already close to similar to Sephardic, and then some people go back into the eastern parts of Europe to pick up more Central Eastern European DNA. So Ashkenazi Jew, he's still partly highly Levantine. He's not as high as other groups, but it's still in him at 30 or 40%. But he picked up a lot of Iberian Peninsula Romanian DNA from living in Rome, and then he also picked up some Central Eastern European. Compared to the Sephardic, he's mainly Southern European, which is also closer to Anatolian farmers, right? But some integration from other phases of Yemeni and different groups. But then he also has a large chunk of Levantine, but he also has North Africans that he picked up because a lot of them, you know, hid out in North Africa for a minute. So they picked up North African genes. And a lot of North Africans, because, you know, during the time when the Moors were in Spain, Jews and them lived side by side. So a lot of these people picked up North African genes and traits from going back and forth for a very long time. And even, you know, you find some Ashkenazis that picked up some of that stuff before going into the further eastern part, because you can find them with some North African traits for some weird reason, you know. The Mediterranean world is very important because the Mediterranean points to the world between North Africa and the Levant, Eastern Mediterranean, and also all the way up to Anatolia. All this place is like the known classical place, but very powerful civilization. Very powerful. And I'm not just talking about like the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, which is in southern Iraq or Iran. Not those there. I'm talking about Mediterranean is the bark from human trade, different populations coming together, blending for a very long time, convergent evolution to the different things that occurred back and forth for a consistent amount of time to form this beautiful, unique cluster. Most of our classical civilizations come from there. That includes Rome, Greece, Egypt, the Phoenicians, the Moroccans in later time, in the medieval time, Hannibal with Carthage, which is the Phoenicians, and even our first Christian fathers. A lot of them were North Africans, you know. And even when Paul had to go through Greece, and people that follow the narrative, you have to go through these badges of honor to deliver whatever you have to have the standard model of what was approved at this time. So Greece is very important, even in the sense of when Christianity started to form, and before Rome got their hands on it, when people had a voice, you start to find things being converted from Greek into Latin and other things. The Mediterranean world is very important. So because of ancient Egypt, outside of the history of the Mediterranean, one of the oldest civilizations on the planet that happened right there. Egypt within itself is very powerful. This is one of the first, and a lot of people get mad at me based on what does the Mediterranean look. It's not just one look. It's a consistency that you can see that's shared, because most of them look very similar, but there are differences. But you can understand why if you understand convergent evolution, sexual selection, different things. With the time, populations always being there. But the old model for outdated blackologists is the true Egyptian is a black sub-Saharan African Dinka-looking dude. That's not true. There has been a gradient of skin tone that ranges from Egypt from darker brown to light olive for a very long time. In the early Neolithic, when pre-Neolithic populations came back in, they mixed with the Ibero-Maroons or Eastern Capsian groups, who were already a blend between ancient West Eurasians, related to Zuzana or the Tufian-like, and fragmented Tokahori, which was the predecessors of the human group that left out, which is late Assyrian populations, right? That left out and became non-African. They came back in and blended with these people. And when these people came back in, these Neolithic Levantines was a mix between the Tufian and Southern Anatolians. So they already had the variant for SLC-245. The vestiges was there, but it wasn't widely spread. Then you have the early European farmers crossing over to Gibraltar, and they're hitting Morocco, and then they're hitting the Great Sahara. But the Aswan cultures is different things. They're hitting it, and they're bringing SLC-245. The gene is going to express itself. It's just not SLC-245. You got 45A2, KIT log gene, and other genes that's responsible for lighter skin. The always been there, just as well as the people that live in the South who can look similar to Northern Sudanese type, right? And this is the face that you see all throughout North Africa. It's been like that.
So when we look at the ancient Israelites and them being the Eastern Mediterranean people, and we try to compare them to, the populations here in America, who would be the closest?
Well, the Hispanics, because the Hispanics, or so-called Latino, are highly Mediterranean. That's why they are classified as Latino. They come from, Latin is one thing, because a Haitian can be Latino, because the Latin, French is a form of Latin, and the Haitians speak that. So let's get that correct. From genetic level, people that are from Hispanic countries within Latin America, when the Spaniards came, the Spaniards were Mediterranean people. The Portuguese are Mediterranean people. So the Hispanic, or so-called Hispanic, he's ranging, some of these dudes is 70% Mediterranean autosomally. Some of these dudes is 60%. Some of them are 40 to 50%. If you're Dominican, the average Dominican is probably 40 to 60% Mediterranean, and we know the other portions, 30-some% Sub-Saharan, 40%. If you're from Santo Domingo, you could be even more higher in African. But the European component is Mediterranean. The closest people to the groups of people in the Mediterranean or the Eastern Mediterranean would be people that we classify as Hispanic. If you look into it, you can see what's going on.
And then, you were just speaking about Moors. If we would do the same comparison for Morocco, is also a Mediterranean place.
Correct.
Again, the Hispanics would probably be the closest.
Yes. The Hispanics would be closer to that. In 711 AD, the Moors were mainly Amazigh people who were riding under General Tariq was following Sharia law under the Islamic Caliphate. And it was at the Crusade, it was their journey, 711, where they would excavate most of those portions of the known world. So the Amazigh got beat, and they got conquered by the Arabs. So the troops that were sent to Spain in 711 AD under General Tariq, who was following order of the Arabs, right? Or the caliphates from the peninsula of Medina and Yemen in different groups. He was following suit of Arabs. But the people that went there in 711 AD were highly Amazigh people. And we know what Amazigh, of course, they all have some traits of Sub-Saharan, very small, like Senegalese. Those traits was in them, right? Because they was always near. And then in the 13th century with the Almoravids, you start to find a southern group that started to dominate over the Amhad, right? The Amhad came a bit later. Like you look up the Black Sultan. The Black Sultan, they said his mother was Ethiopian. Ethiopian only means birth black. So you gotta look at the term. She was probably either Sahelian Fulani type or a Mindi type woman. He was admixed. That's what the Black Sultan. But I'm talking about the Almoravids in the 13th century. They recruited people near southern Mauritania and Senegal in the military. So the first wave of the Moors were highly Amazigh, and the Amazigh people were already highly Anatolian-like because they already mixed with Anatolian farmers that crossed from Iberian Peninsula a very long time ago. Then, in the 13th century, you found a deeper increase in Sub-Saharan. But then they found the graves recently of these Moors, but they wasn't the majority. They never was the majority. Let's get that correct. Then you find some of the Amazigh were also dark. All of them were not fair. Sometimes when they're described as dark, people assume that they're talking about Senegalese people, and they're not all the time. Some Amazigh people are brown skinned, right? Or dark. But then a lot of them are very fair. Not to make it a skin thing, but some Sub-Saharan were included in the militaries increasing in phases and time. So you'll find one or two or three in certain depictions over all the other ones that look very fair skinned, right? But then when they looked at the DNA of the recent Moors, they were very similar to Moriscos. Moriscos were Iberian Peninsula individuals that converted to Islam. So they were mixing with those people. So they increased more of the Iberian Peninsula DNA in these people, right? But when they looked at the Moriscos, some of them had Sub-Saharan traces. Like two they found was similar to Senegalese in some layers of the DNA and East Africans in some layers of the DNA, right? So it was there. So if we look at all that, the best proxy of this type of picture, if you exclude the Native Americans, would be Hispanics. Because Hispanics have that type of mix between Iberian Peninsula, if you exclude the Native, and that Sub-Saharan and some traces of North African. You see what I'm trying to say? It gets deep like that as a proxy. Now, if a black wanted to hold on to it, in the sense of the traces that exist in these people from a smaller scale, but if they want to look at that from their deeper scale, they can look at their Senegalese E123B, which is E1B1B, and different subclades of that, from EV38 under EV12 or EM78, and different groups. EV1515, which is also connected to populations under EM123 and the EM81 that's in North Africa, which is all mainly under E1B1B. And West Africans are mainly EM2. EM2 came from EV38 and all those different clades of EM78, EM123, EZA27 all came from under EM215. EM215 and EV38 split from E1B1, which is EP2, from an early ancestral Northeast African man or group of men, right, who lived near between Upper Egypt and North Sudan, and they were running in between northern Eritrea and Ethiopia. And these groups, if I can postulate, would have been a group that comes out of the Cormarusian culture that lingered in the Nile for a long time and went into different directions. As a proxy, if I use that. But we know for a fact that the region from where EP2 come from is, Upper Egypt, North Sudan, before dispersing in different directions. EM123, which was in Levant, it comes out of EZA27, and out of EZA27, EZA30, and then EM123, it goes into Levant. That comes from some type of eastern population that was in the Nile a very long time ago, probably 23,000 years ago. And they integrate into the Levant and branch off of EZA27, and then go into the Levant and mix with the indigenous Cambrian populations. They probably went over there as early as 17,000 years ago and become the Mushabians. The Mushabians, as they mix with these people, start to mix with more of the southern Cambrian groups who were mixed with a deeper chunk of basal Eurasian and West Eurasian, because they all come from mainland West Eurasians, and all blend into each other. So they mix into these people, and then you have a long concentrated E branch under EZA27 that's spending time in the Levant and becomes independent and creates its own clades over there. Then you have, EV12, which comes out of EM78, which is the brother of EM78 and EZA27 are brothers, which come from a specific clade at a specific time. EV68, I'm sorry. And then you have EM78, and then EV12, EV22, and EV38, which is all under EM78, EV12, that goes in different directions. So when you really follow it, you can see what's going on. One group stayed in the Nile, or the northern portion of the Nile. You even find out Ibero-Mauritians, they start to have EV12 clades, which show that some dudes from the Nile kind of penetrated west of the Mediterranean and mixed into the earlier Tyrian populations before even the West Asian Zuzana came in. You had populations of Africans intermingling at different stages of time before the West Asians came in a long time ago. So people have been moving around for a very long time. So you have one group going west and staying in the Nile, and another group splitting from the Nile and going into the Levant, and they're mingling with population in the Levant who were Caymans. But before he got there, a lot of those men probably was CF, G, H, and other stuff, but they haven't found or discovered those Y chromosomes yet.
And if you could just touch on the EV13.
EV13 comes out of that EV13 crosses out of the EM78, and it's related to the EV12, and it goes into the Balkans a long time ago. It goes into the Mediterranean zones a long time ago. It kind of drifted off and went into the Balkan area and became independent and became its own cleft clade over there that's more common in European populations, especially Eastern Europeans in the Mediterranean, and certain groups of people in the Balkans and Greece in certain areas. You can find it over there more. It's more concentrated in those regions. EV13 is more closer to EV12 on the EM78. Matter of fact, and what I want you to do is look that up right now so we can back that up as I'm driving. Go to EV13 and then so you can read it to the audience so they can have a clear understanding of what I'm saying.
So it says EV13, European white DNA haplogroup that originated in the Neolithic period around 9,000 years ago. It's a subclade of E1B1B, which originated in North and East Africa or the Near East. EV13 is concentrated in Southeast Europe and the Balkans and is considered an old European haplogroup.
Right. And if you go back, you can see what it's connected to through the EM78 or EV12. You should be able to see that. It should give you a place with it. Because it's more connected to EV12 than EM123 in the Levant. So it's more closer to EM78. So with that being said, now we have a clear understanding some of those men kind of left out too. But what it looks like is these Africans was leaving out at different phases in different directions. Some niggas that escaped. It's just like with R1B VA8. B88 developed in the Balkans.
before we even went into Italy with Villabrana man, and then before those dudes drifted into North Africa, and then ended up in the Sahara, and then ended up in Central Africa today. But the predecessor developed in the Balkan area. Left out at different times. It wasn't one, hotspot. But we know black Americans got to stop hating their goddamn African ancestors. EZA-27 developed around 20-some thousand years ago, or 20,000 years ago, 15,000. So EM123 splits from EZA-27 and goes into the Levant probably around 16,000 years ago. EZA-27. EM35 is EM215. That's E1B1B. It goes into its own direction. So EM35 gave birth to EZA-27 and EV65. EV65 gave birth to EM78. EZA-27 gave birth to EM123. So it left out of North Africa and mixed into those Cambrians. It happened in phases. And they left out of North Africa already mixed. Now, you know that Nuret skeleton that they found, his Y chromosome is under EZA-27. It's under EM123. It's under that branch. That shit came out of Egypt, bro. That's because they come from the Tupians. That's mainly E. We don't know what was over there before that E got there. That's what niggas not understanding. It was something over there before we got there.
That the color coordinates game that people are playing, it doesn't define who is who. Again, African Americans, prestigious African Americans who are famous, you have Y chromosomes that go back to Europe. That doesn't make them European. Their overall DNA composition, autosomally, is sub-Saharan African, so they'll be better than black. It's just like if you pulled over the typical black man who's 80% sub-Saharan African, nobody's asking for haplogroups. Haplogroups is something that's going to happen because obviously people are going to have sex in places that, that's not standard to the population that they drift from, right? According to people. So you even find European men with Y chromosomes that go back to Africa. It can go backwards and forwards. There are plenty of European men with E markers, right? It's just not E, but when you go to some place, you might find some white man you find online, Y chromosomes is common in West and Central Africa. Not just E1B1B in North Africa or East Africa, but to a lesser extent, very small, you find white men from, down south with EM2 clades of E1B1A, right? Or you find it. So this whole thing, it doesn't define who you are, based off the marginal marker of the social constructual patterns of what they label who is who. Muhammad Ali might fight, he had a Y chromosome, go back to Europe, Michael Jackson, Nas, but these are still black men, overall. Yeah, so some Europeans in America can have Q, because we know that Europeans been there for a very long time after colonization, and they mix with natives. But you also find small populations, like I said, to a lesser extent. Because, the largest component that you're going to find are African Americans when it comes to percentage. You're going to find the highest is E, which is EM2. Then next under them is R, because we've been around, Europeans and Africans have been back and forth. So that'll be the next marker. So you have between 60 to 70% E1B1A, around 30 to 20% R. Then you start to find little outlier markers. You might find some G, you might find some T, to a lesser, very less. You might find some African Americans with E1B1B that they receive from some type of European. You also might find, or even like a lot of the conquistadors, the Spaniards, some of them had E1B1B. We have to understand the history of Southern Europe. And, you find Europeans, you have white Europeans with A, it's there. The singer, the singer from Backstreet Boys, he has A. There are white people with A. And you also find Q also went to Europe because Native Americans were transported to Europe. People don't know that portion of history. So you're going to find, to a very small percentage, not overall, you'll find some white people in Europe. With Q, the Qs in Northern Europe, those people in Northern Europe, Scandinavian groups, had a longer run with deeper East Eurasian type people for a very long time. Not just with no recent phase with Mongolians or other things. Those type of Eurasians have been pulsing into northern portions of deeper Europe for a very long time. So you're going to find exclusive branches of Q up there. And all types of markers when it comes to populations of Iceland and different things. I think that people got to get into understanding that people that they classify as Hispanic is very old in America. It's just not this portion of the United States. Because, Puerto Rico and all, North America is big, right? Jamaica and all that shit is part of North America. If you look at it, look at the countries of North America. Look that up, not just the United States. But Latin America is very old. And they're older than the British that took over, the Anglos that took over. These Hispanics that we see are very old people, with a sense of them being partly of the first colonizers and having the oldest remnants of the indigenous people that's been here for almost 18 to 19,000 years in native. And the first wave of Africans that was enslaved and brought to the Americas from the Spaniards and Portuguese, they're a blend of all that old phase of recent American history. Compared to the other people, you know, when you include those portions of America before the British took over the game and then, you know, America fought for its independence and broke off, now people should really start studying the Constitution. But Hispanics is very old in a sense of recent historical phase of the Americas that we know. I appreciate the hate that I received from my posts. I don't give a damn because I'm here to kill racism. I don't give a fuck about a black view, a white view, Arab view, Hispanic view. I don't give a fuck about none of that shit. I care about real human beings view. I'm not centric in anything. I'm biocentric, life-centric, you know. Biology means the study of life. So I'm very life-centered. That's all I care about at this point, you know. And that's it.
Yeah, thank you for your time, my brother. I hope everybody appreciates NGOZI's time, his wisdom that he shares with us. And he's speaking from a scientific place, not a place of his personal emotions or any type of agenda. I just want to make that clear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate you, brother. Thank you. Peace and love to you, brother Al. Salam alaikum and shalom to you, brother. And peace and love, man, for the panel. And I thank everybody for allowing me to have this voice to express myself. Peace and love, man. And thanks for the support, King.
Anybody got any questions, you know, leave them in the comment section. Please like, subscribe to the Justice Amir channel. And there's more to come. Shalom.